When I started seeing this unravel and I saw how horrible it was, people dying desperately, our senior citizens spending their last days alone in the hospital, family members not allowed to come in, even though the family members were fully contaminated, they were taking care of their loved ones at home, they couldn't be with their loved ones, seeing people denied treatment and denied treatment in a way where it was obvious that people wanted to do harm to others. I'll give you an example. I had a patient in Dallas and they were sick with COVID. And we knew by the time this case had come on, we knew ivermectin was very safe, very effective, very affordable. And I prescribed ivermectin. And I'll never forget the pharmacist calling me and saying, listen, the guidelines don't say that you can use ivermectin to treat COVID-19. He was reading me, a riot act on this. And I was saying, listen, would that same pharmacist call and tell me that I couldn't use, cosevimilan to treat diabetes? I mean, since when would he take time out of his day to try to scream at me over the phone? This poor, desperate patient needed treatment. And when I saw that, I saw intentionality. People wanted to do harm to others. I'll give you another example of harm. It came into people's minds. There was a case that became known to me of a graduate student up in Chicago, and he wasn't going to take the vaccine. He's a PhD. He had already gone through his qualifying exams. All he needed to do was kind of finish off his thesis. And they said, you have to take a vaccine. He says, I'm not going to take it. I'm working remotely at home. I'm working on my thesis. They said, you have to take it. He goes, I'm not going to take it. And he said, you know what? I'll make this easy. I'll just transfer to another university and finish my thesis there. Do you know his university met, the graduate school met, they met with the registrar and the provost, and for him, they changed the rules. And they now made the rules that he couldn't transfer any of his prior work to the other university. He had to start from scratch. So that told me it was in the minds of people to hurt other people. They wanted to harm him professionally. And I saw it in my career. I mentioned Ron Kelly at the SDA in Berrien Springs. In the end, they harmed him and forced him out of his preaching position. They harmed Conrad Vide, took him away his teaching credentials. We saw this over and over again. There are 2,000 perfectly capable French doctors who had their license stripped away from them, about another 1,000 in Australia. These were needed workers. A leading figure in early treatment research was Didier Raoult in France. And the French authorities came after him. They did everything they could to discredit him and harm him. But they didn't stop there. They went back to every journal. He's the most published microbiologist in the world. And they went to every journal he's ever published in, and they tried to erase his entire publication record and put letters of concern, even on stuff he did decades ago. So that told you it was in the minds of people to hurt other people. It was demonic.
That's very demonic. Were pharmacists taking those liberties before all this? Would they ever? That's crazy. That is crazy.
Think about the American Medical Association in September of 2021, where they launched an official campaign. And their campaign is to abolish the use of ivermectin. Abolish it. Why would the AMA care? Are they trying to abolish amoxicillin use or ciprofloxacin? Why would they care to abolish the use of ivermectin? It was in their mind to try to deny people a treatment that we saw was clearly working. And the randomized trials showed it worked. There was a prospective comparative study published out of Florida called the ICON study in chest. Ivermectin was associated with a 50% mortality. Everyone should have received ivermectin. As an outpatient, certainly when you hit the ER, it should have been continued. It's safer than Tylenol. Why would the AMA launch in a sense, along with the FDA, launch a war against ivermectin? This was so FDA posted misleading statements to the public. Later on, they were sued by Dr. Bowden, Apter, and Merrick. And the doctors prevailed. And the FDA said, well, we have to take down our false information on ivermectin. This is just example after example of what happened during the pandemic. I never could have guessed this would happen in my life.
Yeah, it's a shame that it has to come to suing to get those rights. In fact, here in Ohio, our House Republicans are trying to pass a law that pharmacists can't do that anymore. Like if a doctor writes the prescription, unless
Right.
there's something super egregious going on, you are obligated to fill it. So, but the fact that we have to write that law just blows my mind. Doctor, when you were unjustly fired and your name's being trashed and you're thrown through the mud. How tell us how God kind of uplifted you through that time. Were there any scriptures that you relied on to draw strength? Any particular stories from the Bible that kept you going?
Well, I tell you, Isaiah 6 comes to mind, about no weapon formed against me. It almost seemed like we were called to battle. Now, bullets aren't flying and swords and shields aren't being used, but we're in a battle of information. We're in a battle of narratives and counter narratives. And, I was called on national TV on prime time hundreds of times, and they'd present, a false narrative put out by Anthony Fauci or Rochelle Lewinsky or Ashish Jha or President Biden. And then they bring me on for a counter narrative. I'd say, just give another opinion. And I could tell you, Americans, made their choice. They'd say, listen, I'm following Dr. McCullough because, I was critical of the pandemic response, but uniquely, I provided solutions with the McCullough protocol, the most widely used early treatment protocol in history. It's been attributed to saving tens of millions of lives, sparing hundreds of millions of hospitalization. And now for long COVID and the vaccine injuries, now it's McCullough protocol based spike protein detoxification, the most widely used approach to having people clear up these spike protein syndromes.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, there was, now correct me if I'm wrong, not to kind of go back to like the history of medicine, but wasn't there a time where doctors were kind of like scientists, and that you as a patient, they tried to learn you and figure out what the best treatment was specifically for you, as opposed to just a generic, list of here's what you do and this is what everybody does type of thing.
Sure,
am I correct
that's a
in
fair
that?
statement. Yeah, medicine is both an art and a science, and no one had ever managed a worldwide global pandemic of a virus that was created intentionally in a biosecurity lab in Wuhan, China. No one in history had tackled that. So I took it on as a great challenge, and I think God guided me in stepping out there, being bold, being relentless, coming up with solutions. I wouldn't let anybody keep me down, and there were just too much at stake. I mean, there were too many lives at stake here, and people started to understand. Wait a minute, they are not being told the truth from their government agencies, even from their doctors or health systems. That they have to seek different opinions, and that's one of the reasons why I have probably the most followers of any practicing doctor in the world right now.
Oh yeah, people will flock to the truth, and I think we're doing a better job of spotting the lies. I think we're going to see a revival amongst the young folks.